Hi, let's have a look at OKB, the native token of the OK exchange. OKX is one of the early centralized exchanges competing with Binance, competing with FTX, and they've got their native token as well, and that one is currently going up quite a bit. We are looking at a price of $32, an 18% price increase just in the last 24 hours. And so OKB is currently at market rank 77 with a market cap of 1.9 billion approximately. Now the token's utility is very much comparable with what you can find, for example, with Binance's BNB. So when you hold OKB tokens, you can get a reduction in trading fees. And so we can directly compare OKB with, for example, BNB, or FTT might be another nice asset to compare it to. So the native token of the FTX exchange. So we will look at the price data. We will directly compare the performances of those coins. We will try to find an answer if it makes sense to jump on this current rally right now, how long this rally might last, and if the OKB token in general is a good investment for the long term. So here's a sneak preview. This is the US dollar chart on a logarithmic scale. You probably know this. The OKB token used to trade for around half a US dollar. Now we are looking at $32. We will also look at OKB relative to Bitcoin. So the OKB price divided by the Bitcoin price. That's this chart over here. Then we will look at OKB versus Ethereum. So how many Ethereum does it take to buy one OKB token? So we see the outperformance of OKB. And then last but not least, the competitors. So OKB valued in FTT, so the FTX token, and OKB valued in BNB. But before we jump onto those charts, let's have a look at slightly different data. Let's have a look at Google Trends to simply see how large is OKX and how is it performing to the competitors. So this is the long-term Google Trend search data. And let's look, for example, at the last 5 years. And we can see the search volume used to be relatively comparable, but recently FTX is outperforming. And that might be due to the Solana boom. FTX is quite tightly cooperating with Solana. Some of the DEXs that are built on Solana, they have a direct integration with the FTX exchange. So that might drive some of the adoption of FTX. But nevertheless, OKX is still growing. Over the last 5 years, we do see that search volume is increasing, and we can also see the first crypto boom over here, right, during the ICO boom. So once the crypto winter happens, obviously the centralized exchanges also lose quite a bit of momentum. And once the rally picks up again, people start trading. Now, how big is OKX compared to, for example, Binance? I think that's a pretty interesting data point because this gives us an indication of how much more risk we potentially take on betting on OKX versus Binance. And I think this is a pretty clear message. Let's look at the last 12 months. And on this chart, you can barely see OKX, right? So Binance is way, way larger. It's more than one order of magnitude larger. So you're definitely taking on more risk. You're definitely betting on the underdog when getting involved with OKX. Now that being said, looking at the chart, what I do like about this recent rally over here is that it happened without increased trading volume. So you don't want a price rally to happen when attention is very high, when trading volume is very high, because then what potentially can happen, let's look at the past, for example, here at OKX, when trading volume is very high, the price also tends to be relatively high. And then when trading volume goes down again, the price tends to decline. So having price appreciations while trading volume stays low is potentially positive because it simply means there's a demand overhang. There's more demand than supply, but it doesn't mean there's a lot of hype around the token. Once trading volume is very, very elevated, that's when times become potentially dangerous. So the recent rally that we just saw in the last days does not see increased trading volume, and that's positive. So this would indicate that over the short term, it could make sense to jump on the rally. Now, what about the long term? If we compare OKX with, for example, Bitcoin, we can see that the token is pretty much trading in a quiet, stable, sidewards trading range. And within that trading range, we are relatively elevated, right? If we stay in the range, we have a potential downside versus Bitcoin, a potential underperformance of around 70%. And if the positive momentum continues, we've got a potential outperformance of 50%. So that doesn't look too great. What about the relative performance to Ethereum? Again, we've got a sidewards trading range. Here it looks way better, right? A potential risk of, say, say 48% versus a potential gain of around 400%. So the question really is, what kind of relative performance do you want to look at? What do you actually want to compare the OKB token to? I tend to prefer the relative Ethereum charts because usually altcoins move more in tandem with Ethereum than with Bitcoin. A lot of Bitcoin investors, they simply buy Bitcoin over the very, very long term, right? They look at the very long-term chart. For example, at this long-term logarithmic regression chart, over all of these years, Bitcoin moved within this channel. And so most Bitcoin investors, they don't really trade Bitcoin, right? They buy Bitcoin for the long term and simply look at it once or twice a year, and that's about it. That's different for Ethereum though. Ethereum is much more actively traded. There's way more transactions happening on the Ethereum blockchain, and the Ethereum price movements are also more correlated with altcoins. So they tend to move more in tandem with altcoins. And so I think the relative performance to Ethereum matters more. Now the problem with this relative chart to Ethereum is that OKB as a token is more risky than Ethereum, right? It's one out of many centralized exchanges. It's even the underdog of those centralized exchanges. The market cap is only 1.9 billion. Or in other words, the market dominance is 0.07%. Ethereum has 20%. So we take on way more risk. And that even holds true when we compare this, for example, to the FTX token or the BNB coin with 3.76% market dominance. So OKB is the most risky. And so when you take on more risk, you should expect an outperformance, which we cannot see versus Ethereum. Now, when we look at the relative chart to FTX, we also do not see that outperformance. Over the last 2 years or so, we saw an underperformance of around 70% versus FTX. And if you look at the BNB token, we saw an underperformance of 80% in the last 3 years. So that's not too great, right? 80% underperformance. Why bet on the underdog, take on more risk when that risk doesn't get compensated? And so even though this long-term US dollar chart, right, it looks very nice for OKB, there's nothing really to complain here. Simply by comparing crypto assets and by comparing risk versus reward, I'd probably not hold OKB over the long term unless you're really taking advantage of the utility. You're really taking advantage of the reduced trading fee. Then, of course, this does make sense. But simply buying and holding doesn't seem to make too much sense. Now, some of those tokens have very interesting staking rewards. And so I checked those for the OKB token as well. Maybe the price doesn't perform that well, but maybe the rewards are very nice. But unfortunately, that's not the case for OKB. Here we get a staking reward on the OKB exchange of 0.5% per annum. So that definitely doesn't make any big difference. So you might as well just buy and hold the token. But all of that being said, the long-term performance might not be that great compared to competitors. The short-term performance, though, is a different question, right? We do see a recent rally and we do see relatively low trading volume. So if you enjoy taking risk, this might very well work out. So there is potentially quite a bit of gain to be made. No matter what chart we look at, the US dollar chart, the Bitcoin chart, or the Ethereum chart, all of those charts, they hint to a potential short-term continuation of this momentum. But if you decide to do such a trade, definitely set yourself proper stop losses. And one way to do this is, for example, to look at the hourly chart, get a moving average, and then find a duration of that moving average that somewhat matches the volatility of the asset. So you don't want to have failed signals, right? You want to smoothen this out a little bit more, and you want to be in the market whenever the price is above the moving average, and you want to be outside of the market whenever we are below. And so that way you can set a stop loss. And so if you increase the duration a little bit to cancel out those wicks over here, we can see that the 200-hour moving average, something like this, doesn't work too bad. So maybe we could imagine this moving average to move something like this in the future. And so this is how you could potentially set your stop losses, depending on your risk tolerance, right? You're looking at a potential loss of, say, 10% or maybe a bit more if it crashes really quickly. But on the other hand, you're looking at a potential gain, that could be around 50% or so. So these kind of trades, they don't work very often, but they don't have to work that often. Most of the times you do get stopped out, but if your payoff is 5-1, that's okay, right? If it only works, say 1/3 of the time, you're still in profit over the long term. So if you like the OKX exchange, fundamentally speaking, you like the product, you like the team, and you feel like taking a risk, this might be a potential short-term trade to take. Over the long term though, just based on the charts, not based on any other factors such as tokenomics or something like this, just based on the charts, over the long term, I think there are better utility tokens out there, namely the BNB token and the FTX token, FTT. If you enjoyed this video, please give this a like. YouTube will then help to grow the channel. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe as well. I publish videos regularly. Last but not least, feel free to join our Telegram channel. We are more than 1,000 people. You can find us either by searching for Bitcoin Strategy Channel within the Telegram app or simply by clicking the link in the video description. See you next time. Bye-bye.